hyperinflation is demarcated by a loss of confidence in the currency. And so there are these various canaries in the coal mine, like the treasury yields are one, or the fact that people use the word fiat. That's one that's pretty crazy. We're now outside of the dogma of the dollar is just this everything in the world. And we're now realizing that the dollar is just a choice we can make. That's a tell. It's a canary in the coal mine, right? That people are beginning to lose confidence in the currency. And if you look at Bitcoin culture, Bitcoin maximalism as a whole, we're canaries in the coal mine because we are people who have already lost confidence in the currency.
I'm a professional and you've completely bugged me out. Now I don't want to say certain things.
I promise you I won't leave this in, but I might start it here. We should talk about the elephant in the room though. You guys rugged me.
Wait, you're saying we rugged you? I was expecting Peter McCormick. Who's this guy?
We had this show lined up for like 3 weeks and then you hopped on with Jack at Christmas.
Oh yeah, we did. That's true.
You rugged
we did kind of rug you.
That was a good show though.
When the young Chad billionaire is like, hop on, you're like, all right, it's hard to say no to.
Pretty much nailed that one. It was a great rip. This will be a great rip as well.
I hope so. But Odell, you've done these shows, like how many years have you done these shows now with Pete?
Since the beginning, right? What it's been, has it been 5 years?
Was the first one 2019 maybe?
The first one was pre-COVID. So that means it was at least 5 years because COVID was 2020. Mm-hmm.
So I didn't feel like I could rip Pete off fully and do it just me and you. So HODL's here.
And do you remember the COVID one? The COVID one was the only one we did remote.
That was my favorite because that was the one where you ripped Pete into asshole.
And we both got trashed. I had to re-listen to it afterwards, but we were just yelling at each other. That was one of the most epic shows. Pete
was so bad during COVID. Yeah. It's funny because he's not. This is his show.
Let's not dunk on Pete here.
He's not here to defend himself.
Look, Pete's a good friend. You can be friends with people that have shitty opinions sometimes. That's what people forget.
Right, we're not doing dunking on Pete show here. But crazy fucking year, right? Right, let's start this. I think the best way to go through this is like chronologically because there's a lot to talk about. ETFs, HODL.
I love ETFs, self-custody Bitcoin. It's scary. And you're going to lose all your coin. No, I think that obviously the ETFs are a big part of the story this year. They've provided, the capital structure that's needed to get us to the next level because obviously it's not going to be retail mom and pop who's pumping this thing from $100,000 to $1 million. That's, a lot of money, a lot of capital that's needed. And so, the ETF structure has been incredibly bullish. If you look at I just heard yesterday that the sum total of Bitcoin ETFs have now surpassed the sum total assets under management of gold ETFs. So that they did that in 1 year, right? The gold ETFs have been in the market for 20 years. The Bitcoin ETFs as a collective surpassed the gold ETFs in 1 fucking year. That's crazy.
Wait, has that done it against all gold ETFs? I saw the chart that was like the BlackRock ETFs.
All gold ETFs.
Holy shit, I didn't see that.
The BlackRock ETF did it against the gold ETF, but just recently all the Bitcoin ETFs did it against all the gold ETFs.
Yeah, the BlackRock one is provocative because it just looks like a straight fucking uppercut.
Right.
But yeah, all ETFs combined, right? The largest gold one is Invesco, GLD. But it's just a perfect example. Like, and what people don't realize is this time last year, the overwhelming majority of Bitcoin Twitter was fading the ETFs. Mm-hmm. They were saying they either weren't going to happen or they were a complete non-deal.
It's priced in, bro.
Ridiculous. Yeah. It's kind of exactly what I see happening with the Strategic Bitcoin Reserve right now, but we can talk about that later. But people were fading the ETFs. They said they were irrelevant. They weren't going to have much of an impact. They clearly have had a massive impact. There's a whole set of, I think the average person should just stay humble, stack sats, and learn how to self-custody Bitcoin. It's incredibly easy to do. It's easier than it's ever been. But it unlocked a whole pool of capital that just had no access to Bitcoin, completely front-run the usual halving cycle in terms of price action, where we hit all-time highs way sooner in the cycle than we would have otherwise. That's just an objective fact. Now, I would push back a little bit on this narrative, HODL, that average people stacking sats, don't have impact on the price anymore. I think they're the they're the gun to the head of everything else to make sure this doesn't happen like gold, right? Like if you're just humbly just going all in on Bitcoin and just constantly trying to increase your cash flow and buy Bitcoin and self-custody it, you're the market correction that makes sure, you're that floor that makes sure that no paper Bitcoin shenanigans are happening. Like at any time, all these guys can get blown out because that floor is just rising and rising and rising and rising.
No, I think we're in total agreement with that. I think that hodlers do set the floor, and also hodlers are able to call bullshit. Hodlers who keep their Bitcoin in self-custody are able to call bullshit in a way that people who are buying paper Bitcoin products are just simply not. Whether that paper Bitcoin is MSTR or whether it's ETFs or whether it's Bitcoin in a custody provider that you don't have access to any of the keys, those are all different forms of paper Bitcoin, and you're just not able to call bullshit in the same way on those. I'm just saying that the amount of capital needed to take us from 100K to $1 million is a significant amount of capital, and the average person doesn't have access to that much capital, right? It's pretty simple. But I do think that we, the hodlers, have a big. Okay, so like I said this on the Jack Mallers thing, but I'll say it again. Like between 1 Bitcoin and 1,000 Bitcoin, hodlers that hold between 1 Bitcoin and 1,000 Bitcoin control 50% of total supply. So the thoughts, beliefs, and opinions of the hodlers who have between 1 and 1,000 Bitcoin matter a lot. And those are going to be very significant in terms of price discovery, right? So like,
and how many people do you think that is, by the way?
I think it's about 100,000 people.
Yeah, I think it's I would say like 250K.
Have you been doing the research on this, Odell?
Yeah, I mean, you can look at on-chain data on like the amount of addresses that hold a certain amount of Bitcoin. So you get upper bounds, right? Because people can hold multiple addresses. And the upper bounds are quite low. It's like 4.5 million, it's like 4.5 million upper bound on people that in self-custody hold more than 10 million sats, $10,000.
Wait, when you did that though, how many like addresses were you assuming people held?
No, the upper bound is like everyone just holds one address.
Right.
And that's what, 4 million?
4.5 million.
That have more than 10 million sats.
Yeah, that's wild. Are you surprised that we didn't see...
In self-custody.
Yeah, of course. But are you surprised we didn't see more volatility in the ETF? Because I expected these to be like the most paper-handed Bitcoiners that we would have.
No, in fact, it's been the opposite.
Yeah.
There's some of the least paper-handed Bitcoin. I don't think there's been any Have there been any outflow days at all on the ETF?
Maybe there's been one or two, but the overwhelming majority have been net inflow days.
Basically no outflow days, which is crazy.
Yeah, wild. So, like, tell me where you think the capital comes from then to move us to $1 million Bitcoin.
Well, I mean, clearly it's coming from pension funds, from passive index flows. It's coming from sovereign wealth funds. It's coming from institutional grade buyers, large family offices. There are just nation states. I mean, potentially nation states. So there's rumors about the UAE already has 400,000 Bitcoin or something, and like the SBR in America is likely going to happen in the first 100 days of the Trump presidency. So I mean, the capital players are much bigger that are needed to pump this thing, and they're coming into the market now, and that's why we're seeing the prices so high.
But so, Odell, when do you think that starts, instead of being like bigger, whether it's like insurance funds or whatever, putting money into Bitcoin, when do you think that stop laughing at me. When do you think we start seeing like this repricing other assets and money coming out of things like real estate?
I'm just laughing because it's all coming together, fam.
Yeah.
Like everything we said is just happening. It's reality now. It's been a crazy year. I think that's already happening. I think it, you recently had Parker on, and I appreciated the Mandibles Then Bitcoin Standard reference on it. Parker succinctly says gradually then suddenly. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a very, every strong meme is based in reality. And at every point in the cycle, we've always seen it gradually then suddenly. You see, like there's a larger version of gradually then suddenly, which is like overall Bitcoin adoption. But every step in the cycle has had sub gradually and then suddenlies. And what do you usually see? You see the challengers move first, right? Because the challengers have way more to gain. We saw Cash App move first on Bitcoin. Then Venmo followed, right? Because Venmo had bigger market share than Cash App. We saw El Salvador move first on Bitcoin. Then other countries started following because El Salvador had absolutely nothing to lose. We saw MicroStrategy and Sailor, who was like basically considered like one of the smallest fish billionaires in the world, right? He had a huge axe to grind, had absolutely nothing to lose, and he went all in on Bitcoin. So we're starting to see that in real estate circles. We're starting to see that in insurance circles. We're seeing that in endowment circles. People dipping their toes in, people that have less career risk. And that is all starting to compound on each other. And I think it happens a lot quicker than people realize. I mean, if you just look back, 4 months ago, right, when we were like sitting, there was like people that strongly believed like we were going to sit at like $58,000 for like a year or something, 2 years, 3 years. And now we're sitting under 100K. People are panicking because we're like dropping down to 90-ish. It's a whole new world. Like people would kill to get $58,000 Bitcoin right now. Bitcoin does this thing where it's like gradual, and then kicks you in the face.
Well, this is the thing. Like, there's only all the price appreciation happens in 11 days or something crazy like that. So I want to jump ahead a bit, but we'll come back. But I think we should talk about strategic Bitcoin reserve because I have some questions on that. First of all, do you think that's going to happen?
Yes,
I do as well.
What kind of percentage chance do you put on that?
90%.
I also agree with 90%.
Right, you've got to explain this then. Why 90%?
So, okay, I'll give you both, and then Matt can give his take. So, I think a sort of a ceremonial EO, which is just like, hey, we're going to keep the Bitcoin that we've already seized that don't have claims on them. I think that
seems like a no-brainer.
That's
but I
right.
mean, like the US buying Bitcoin.
Yes. So I think that's the thing that has a 90% chance likelihood. Like we're definitely going to see something like that in the first 100 days of the Trump administration. And then I think, a significant, amount of buying by the US government, like let's say they plan to get to 1 million, 2 million, 3 million coins. I put that at like a 35% likelihood. And I think if that does happen, it's going to happen via secret executive order. So if you think about the nation state level game theory here, you don't want to let other nation states know that you're going first, right? And I know that there are people who are in the president's ear alerting him to the game theory, the president-elect, alerting him to the game theory of Bitcoin and saying, hey, announcing it is a bad decision. You're going to get less Bitcoin if you announce it. You're going to have to pay a higher price. What you should do is do it in secret. The president does have the ability to do secret executive orders. You should do it in secret, and then you should announce at a later date when you're done acquiring. This is the rumor that was coming out of Dubai, is that the United Arab Emirates have already accumulated 400,000 Bitcoin, but they didn't want to announce until the U.S. government had gone first. And I didn't know if that was because of, petrodollar relations or if that was because of, their Bitcoin strategy. I'm not really sure. But something spooked them. They got cold feet and they were supposed to do an announcement. And they didn't do an announcement, right? And so I think that doing it via secret EO makes the most sense and is the most likely to happen if the U.S. government is serious about it. Doing it via ceremonial, like I'm going to sign it on day one and I'm going to hold it up with the pen and everything. That's if you're not serious. You just want to do it for the Bitcoiners because they helped get you elected, basically. You were smirking at that, Odell. Go on.
No, once again, it's all coming together, fam. It's beautiful. I'm laughing with you guys. I'm not laughing at you guys. HODL's right. There's two things right here. There's an executive order, and then there's potentially a congressional bill, right? And Senator Lummis has already put forward a congressional bill to do this. Now, obviously, Congress, everything just moves really slowly, right? I think the core fundamental here is the beauty of this versus other types of campaign promises is it doesn't require trusting a politician. All it requires is that you assume that politicians are greedy, which is the easiest assumption you could ever make in the world. So that's the foundational element for my conviction here. The second thing is I would put about 90% on an executive order right in the beginning of the presidency. Whether that's actually day one or like basically day one. They say day one, but rumor is that. Good rumors are that Trump wants to sign like 1,200 executive orders, quote unquote, day one. So it's not like him debating over the SBR executive order, should I do it or should I not? It's like that is part of a stack of 1,200 executive orders. That makes it way more likely. That executive order that's been proposed by Bitcoin Policy Institute allocates 21 billion to Bitcoin. So that's about 200,000 Bitcoin at current prices, right? And obviously there's going to be slippage depending on how they execute that. That I would put at like 90%. I think it's a no-brainer. I think you're just assuming greed. I think it's not priced in at all, just like the Trump election wasn't priced in, even though it seemed obvious for most of us, and just like the ETF wasn't priced in, because even though it seemed like most people can't think for themselves, so these things don't get priced in. And then I think we see something happen on the congressional side, and that's going to take a longer period of time. And I would put a lower percentage on that, but I'm probably higher than 35% or whatever HODL said. Now, I don't think this like secret thing happens. I think we have a massive bureaucracy, and no matter how much Vivek and Elon say they're going to like cut the bureaucracy, huge governments and huge bureaucracies have a disadvantage here. It's the same thing we like when you have the UAE or El Salvador. It's like 3 people decide, and they can do it in secret, or Bhutan, right? You can do it in secret, and you can just make it fucking happen, and you have no reason to tell the world, because then you have slippage, and that's a negative to you. Or Putin in Russia. And the same thing happens with something like a MicroStrategy versus a Microsoft, right? Microsoft needs all these shareholders to come together, while Saylor can just say, hold my beer. Like, it's not in secret. He's like telegraphing it to the whole world exactly what he's going to do, and still does it. But he can move very quickly, right? And the U.S. can't move as quickly. So I think like a secret thing is probably unlikely. I think he actually like holds up the signed paper for the executive order in the beginning, but it'll be a smaller amount. The price will start running away. It'll be heavily memed, like how much the value of the 400,000 Bitcoin, the 200,000 plus the existing seized Bitcoin is. It'll be a huge meme on how much that value is appreciated in 20 days, and 40 days, and 60 days, and it'll cause all this pressure. And meanwhile, all these politicians, all the individual congressional people, all of their friends and family, like they're all aping into Bitcoin, because that's what they all do. What is the meme where they like show the congressional performance on stock picking? Like, they're amazing geniuses. They somehow always pick the best stocks. No, there's inherent corruption there, and they're picking the stuff they know is going to win because of their policies. And I think it just becomes a kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. So most people are sleeping on it. It's incredibly likely. All you have to do is assume greed in terms of politicians. I think it's great for America. I think it's positive for Bitcoiners because our purchasing power increases, which is awesome. Like, life is easier when we have more money, and we can do other things. And then I think from that point, it's a foot in the door, and then hopefully we start getting like real freedom benefits out of it in terms of repealing the Bank Secrecy Act, or things a step below that, tax treatment. Like, all these different things are kind of knock-on effects that happen after you get your foot in the door with them actually owning Bitcoin, the individual politicians owning Bitcoin and the government owning Bitcoin.
Yeah, I was just going to say, let me agree with Matt here real quick. I do think that there's a non-trivial chance it happens via secret EO. But I think, to Matt's point, if the U.S. government is making moves, it's going to be obvious, right? I mean, these are public, global public markets that you're going to be able to see the bias, basically. And you're going to have leaked information, because the Trump White House, we know, is leaky as a sieve, or at least it was during the last administration. And we expect it to be during this administration. And I think I want to talk real quick about the SBR from an American perspective and from a Bitcoiner perspective. I think the reason it's very easy to say, hey, I don't support the SBR because I don't support a bunch of Bitcoin bros getting an air quote bailout, which is what the people on like MSNBC are saying. And it's like, first of all, we don't need your fucking bailout. We're doing very well without you. Thanks. Second of all, the reason to do it is to actually strengthen America by solving Triffin's dilemma. Triffin's dilemma is an economic problem that occurs when you have the reserve currency and the reserve asset is the same thing. And it's one of the things that America has been suffering under for the last 50 years since we went off the gold standard. And the reason the American manufacturing base got hollowed out is not necessarily because like we have a bunch of evil globalists running our society, even though we do. The reason it got hollowed out is because of Triffin's dilemma. Our chief export became dollars, and it was so much easier for us to export dollars than it was for us to export manufactured goods. So you buy Bitcoin, you separate the reserve currency from the reserve asset. Bitcoin becomes the reserve asset. The US dollar stays as the reserve currency. You rehome the manufacturing base, and America keeps winning, and we have prosperity into the next 100 years. If you're an American, that is why you should care.
Wait, explain that Triffin's dilemma thing. Is that because you have to keep the US dollar weak?
You know what, Danny? That's the economics question, my guy. All right, I'm not prepared for that.
Yeah, that's the crux of it, basically. Is that we have an incentive to inflate our currency, right? We have multiple incentives to do that. Now, here's the thing: like we talked about, like the low IQ way of looking at this on why it's good for America is once again born in memes, and we've talked about this for years. Is like if you look at the current state of the U.S. government and our debt burden. Literally, the only way you could even conceivably imagine ourselves digging ourselves out of this is to print money and buy Bitcoin. We have a unique opportunity here where we're the only country in the world where our debt is denominated in our own shitcoin. And we have the ability to print that shitcoin and buy the hardest asset that's ever existed. Now, I used to joke about this. I actually thought it was never a possibility, like never going to happen. And we're starting to see the early signs of it. Now, there's a delicate act here, right? Because you don't want the currency to go into free fall. That's where you end up in a true mandible situation. And even without the Bitcoin piece, we're already like kind of on the precipice of it. You know, we're already like you're starting to see, 10-year treasury yields go out of control. Like people starting to realize like, why am I lending the US government money for 10 years at a low interest rate? And so the confidence there is already shook. Now, if you shake confidence more, it could get really bad really quickly. So there's a delicate balancing act where you start to see things like in the Lummis bill, we're selling our gold that's not marked to market for Bitcoin. We're not going to print money to buy Bitcoin. But the real like grug brain move here is you print as much as the market can tolerate and you buy as much Bitcoin as possible. That Bitcoin appreciates in purchasing power over time. And all of a sudden, our government is solvent instead of not solvent. Who wouldn't want a solvent government? And you can't imagine any other possibility where that could even be possible at our current debt burden.
By the way, you know who's doing this is Michael Saylor. Michael Saylor is diluting his shareholders in order to accrete more Bitcoin value to his books. And so far, the market enjoys it and is continuing to pile money into that as an investment vehicle, right? And I think that one thing Matt said about the loss of confidence in the currency, that is the key. Hyperinflation is demarcated by a loss of confidence in the currency. And so there are these various canaries in the coal mine, like the treasury yields are one, or the fact that people use the word fiat. That's one that's pretty crazy. We're now outside of the dogma of the dollar is just this everything in the world. And we're now realizing that the dollar is just a choice we can make. We can make a choice between dollars, choice between Bitcoin, a choice between equities, et cetera. And I think that's a very, that's a tell. It's a canary in the coal mine, right? That people are beginning to lose confidence in the currency. And if you look at Bitcoin culture, Bitcoin maximalism as a whole, we're canaries in the coal mine because we are people who have already lost confidence in the currency, right? So, I mean, it's a pretty big deal that there's a whole group of insane internet individuals and people listen to these kinds of conversations where we're all talking about our loss of confidence in the currency, right? So, like, hyperinflation can occur at any point and it can take you off guard. But that said, I'm hopeful that we just sort of Bitcoinize instead of hyper Bitcoinize, and it's a slow, orderly, move to the off ramp so that people can get out intact. I hope that happens. Anyway, that's my wish.
Say the line, Matt.
I also hope that'll happen. I just don't think that's the likely scenario.
Yeah.
I want to go back to what Matt was saying before, though. So I get that Bitcoin's money for enemies and you can't stop anyone buying it, whether that's like a person or a state. But do you see any risk in the sort of co-option of Bitcoin with this? And this is why I want to get to strategic reserve next after ETFs, because I feel like they're kind of in the same bucket.
Well, let's talk it through, right? So Bitcoin is now entering into the traditional financial system. Mm-hmm. It's now entering into nation state adoption. So it's going to be held. There's going to be a Fort Trump that holds Bitcoin. That's pretty crazy thing that's going to happen, right? So I mean, you got Bitcoin. You could see it from one perspective as Bitcoin being subsumed and co-opted and controlled by the traditional market. Or another term you could use is Bitcoin being ghettoized as a store of value, right? So we all know that Bitcoin has these amazing, features as a medium of exchange and, the Lightning Network and its uncensorable transaction capability, et cetera, right? But if Bitcoin only ever becomes reserve asset, store of value, digital gold, then it basically gets ghettoized, and it's still here's the weird thing is like it goes to millions of dollars a coin, and we all get rich, but we lose freedom money along the way, and that's a real concern, and I understand why people have those concerns. My personal perspective on this is that as Bitcoiners get rich, because Bitcoin is, air quotes, co-opted as a store of value, we continue to exert power and political influence, and we eventually, have enough power and political influence to sort of unleash Bitcoin's full potential and capabilities. Now, that's like maybe a rosy view of the subject because you are a hardcore crypto anarchist and you believe that the state should just cease to exist entirely. But I mean, listen, man, the thing is, Bitcoin doesn't do the thing that some people want it to do, where it makes the virtuous wealthy and it makes the impure impoverished. It just doesn't do that. People that have, gains from, various nefarious fiat activities, they're going to be able to port their money into Bitcoin as well if they're smart and they see the sea change that's taking place. So there are going to be bad people, evil people on a Bitcoin standard too. It's not going to be this panacea where it takes all the, awful people you don't like to zero, while it makes all the, people you do like rich, right? So like, I think that we're going to get about half the seats at the table of power, and there's going to be a negotiation between us and the traditional, money elite. And that conversation will be about what the rule set is. And the rule set, in our opinion, as Bitcoiners, should be fair, non-biased, enforced by code and machines.
I guess the fear, though, is not necessarily like is making the virtuous rich. It's more, what are the Trump administration going to do? Are they still going to go after like open source developers like the Samurai guys? And is this just going to be like a store of value coming through the front door, but they still attack self-custody through the back door?
So look, I think, first of all, Bitcoin doesn't solve wealth inequality, okay? It doesn't like magically solve wealth inequality. What it does do is it makes the actual monetary system, the ladder that we're all living on, a fair ladder that can't be corrupted. And how does it do that? It does it because Bitcoin's incredibly difficult to change by default. If you have more Bitcoin, you don't have more power over the network. That's a key fundamental sea change from every other institution we rely on, including all the proof of stake shitcoins, but you look at equities, you look at governments, everything. The more you own, the more power you have, and then you can corrupt it with your power to give yourself an advantage. Bitcoin doesn't have that. Now, I look at it more, it's key here that you don't look at this stuff in a vacuum, right? Well, first of all, obviously, we already said this, you can't stop anyone from buying Bitcoin. That's a key point. But the second thing is, from a regulatory perspective, particularly as an American, it has been absolutely brutal out here. The status quo has been brutal. We've seen massive KYC AML overreach, burdensome regulation that doesn't actually stop criminals in the name of stopping criminals, but it doesn't stop criminals because they use stolen or bought information while average people get fucked. We've seen companies have to deal with tons and tons of legal expense in vague regulatory environments. And from every sign right now, it appears that the Trump administration is moving in a positive direction from a very, very low bar. And I think the Strategic Bitcoin Reserve gives them incentive to continue moving in that direction. Because not only does it enrich their own coffers, but it enriches the coffers of their supporters. And there's this nice little virtuous feedback loop. Now, the real concern, and I've talked about this on previous shows with you and Peter, has not changed. And the real concern is not whether or not Bitcoin is freedom money or not freedom money. Bitcoin's a protocol. It's incredibly hard to change. You can use it today without permission, and that's core, right? Because just because you can't save without permission if you can't spend without permission. If you save your money and then you have to ask someone if you can spend it, then you don't have any money because you can't spend the thing. You can't actually realize the value. The problem is people can use it how they choose to use it, and most users are captured. Most users will continue to be captured. So when you look at Bitcoin as adoption grows, what I expect to happen is you see a world where 95% of people are using it in a surveilled, controlled way, and 5% or less are using it in a freedom-oriented way without permission. And so the goal for people in the community that care about this stuff should be increasing that bottom number, increasing the amount of people that use it as freedom money. And the way you do that is you do that through tools and you do it through education. And we've made a lot of progress there. Now, the second piece I would say is, particularly on the ETF side, we saw a lot of this same concern from people. But to HODL's point, ideological Bitcoiners that actually care about this stuff can reverse that trend and actually make it a positive. And we've seen that with OpenSats. OpenSats is my charity that I co-founded with a bunch of great Bitcoiners. And we take management fees from the ETFs and we deliver that to open source contributors. And the key there is the ETFs aren't dictating where that money goes, right? They're giving us the money. They're getting a PR advantage. They're also getting indirect benefits to the underlying protocol being more robust, which is what their products rely on. And then open source contributors are getting no strings attached grants. We've also seen on the 1031 side with venture, where we've had rich family offices, endowments, and whatnot. They don't allocate the money directly. They give it to us. We're ride or die Bitcoiners, and then we allocate it to freedom-oriented projects. So it goes in both directions, and I think it's key here that you realize that we don't live in a vacuum. And you can't pretend like the last 5, 8, 10 years in America hasn't happened, and then say like, oh, it's just going to get worse from here, because the status quo is that it was getting worse and worse and worse and worse. And for the first time in my lifetime, and the first time since I've been in Bitcoin, there's some signs that it could be getting better. And yes, Bitcoin doesn't care about any of this shit for the most part on the protocol level. But as an American, like, I would much prefer if my government wasn't bankrupt trying to go after me and everything that I've tried to build in this country, and instead was aligned, at least indirectly, with my interests. And that's what we're seeing play out right now.
So are you saying that you expect the Trump administration to go easier on the KYC AML laws and like self-custody devs? Or is that what you mean?
I think if you look at all the horrible KYC AML stuff and self-custody stuff, at its core is this 1970s piece of legislation called the Bank Secrecy Act. And I think for the first time in my lifetime, there's a non-zero chance that we can repeal that thing. Now, I'm not saying it's a high chance. It's definitely not 90% like the Strategic Bitcoin Reserve, but it's non-zero, and that's massive, like 5 to 15% or something.
But how does Bitcoin play into repealing that?
I think what plays into it is if you make the regulatory environment in America the best environment for Bitcoiners, Bitcoin companies, Bitcoin individuals, then America will greatly benefit from that. And they see almost direct benefits from it if they're holding a strategic Bitcoin reserve. But also Trump himself and his group of his posse, right? Like Vance is quite young. Like they see significant benefits in that voting block, and that set of supporters actually getting direct benefits. So it's all about incentives, and the incentives are really lined up here. And then the second piece is just anecdotal. But for instance, like Trump was one of the only presidents who didn't submit his tax returns voluntarily to the public when he ran. I think specifically, like he is, more aligned with this idea that there's too much financial overreach, there's too much, government surveillance. He was the subject and target of multiple government surveillance operations. So I'm not saying like he's perfect. I'm not, expecting the world. I'm just saying that the bar was so low. Mm-hmm. The bar was so low. If you go back even just a year, 2 years, we were trending in a horrible direction. And there is some light here. There's some light here, and we'll see how it plays out. And there's a lot of Bitcoiners behind the scenes that are trying to push it in the right direction and make that reality come true.
Matt said it the nice way, and I'll say it the real way, which is the lesson of this election was that if you fuck with Bitcoin, you lose. Mm-hmm. That was the lesson. And everybody took that lesson home, and there are a bunch of people that are upset about it, especially on the Democratic side, but they picked a fight with us for no fucking reason, okay? And we're not even that political, to be honest with you. Like, we just want to be left alone. And the reason we got political in this cycle was because of that fact, because we want to be left alone and they wouldn't leave us alone, right? And so it wasn't just Bitcoin, there was a lot of crypto money that was sloshing around as well. But the lesson was, if you fuck with crypto, you're going to lose. And also, I think like the crypto lobby and the Bitcoin lobby in general were like, they were like a baby just flexing their powers. Like we actually don't know how powerful yet we are politically. Mm-hmm. we made a meaningful difference in this election, and we're going to make meaningful differences. And I think every election going forward, and the crypto lobby is going to be something that you're going to have to contend with. So don't do things to piss those people off. Simple. I mean, why do you want to pick a fight with a bunch of rich millennials? It doesn't even make sense. Like the millennials are on their way up as the next most powerful voting bloc in the country after the baby boomers. And you want to pick a fight with the richest subset of them? That makes no sense. You're going to get wrecked if you keep.
Do you think this is Bitcoiners getting a seat at the table?
I still don't think we have a seat at the table. No, but I think we were able to make a dent in this election in a way that was meaningful. You know,
I mean, I think it's important to realize here that most people that seek the proverbial seat at the table tend to be the worst of us, and Bitcoiners aren't perfect. So be careful what you wish for. It'll probably happen regardless. It doesn't mean we agree with who's ever sitting at the table. But I think the key here is incentive alignment, right? And I mean, I have another anecdote. We've seen over the one positive trend that we saw pre-Trump was on the state basis. Like, one of the beauties of America is that we have states' rights, and the states have some general autonomy in how they govern. And the states have become very competitive in terms of luring Bitcoin talent. And I'm recording out of Bitcoin Park in Nashville, and we've quickly seen Tennessee trying to vie with Texas in terms of one of the best places to start a Bitcoin business. And we had our annual energy and mining summit last year, and these guys were like these energy people. They weren't Bitcoiners, right? Gray hair energy people. They've been in the energy industry for 40 years. They're like looking around, they're like, I've never seen young people so excited about energy innovation, right? Like, it's infectious. Like, you see a bunch of young people that are motivated, that they're independently, they're financially independent, right? It's not that they're just like mooching off the welfare state or mooching off their parents. They're financially independent, they're motivated, they're quite intelligent, and they want to get shit done. And you have to be an idiot to be like, this is the worst path for our country to go in. Like, it's clearly the best path for the country to go in. And politicians realize that. At the lowest levels, they realize that. And slowly, it's starting to seep up.
What Bitcoin Did is brought to you by our lead sponsor and massive legends, Iron, the largest NASDAQ-listed Bitcoin miner using 100% renewable energy. Iron are not just powering the Bitcoin network, they're also providing cutting-edge computing resources for AI, all backed by renewable energy. We've been working with their founders, Dan and Will, for quite some time now, and have been really impressed with their values, especially their commitment to local communities and sustainable computing power. So whether you're interested in mining Bitcoin or harnessing AI compute, Iron is setting the standard. Visit iron.com to learn more, which is IREN.com.
So you said before that the incentives are aligned, but also at the same time, there's people coming in like David Sachs whose incentives are not necessarily aligned with Bitcoin. Like, he's a massive shitcoiner. Yeah. How do you kind of deal with that?
Well, this is where I was saying the seat at the table thing is, I think that's a perfect example. Like, I think the A16Z PayPal mafia can go fuck themselves, and they're part of the problem. They caused a lot of these problems, and obviously they have more influence and power than they've ever had. David Sachs, Peter Thiel, Mark Andreessen, Elon, and it's a give and take. But you also can't. Once again, we don't live in a vacuum, right? And so you have to compare it to where we were previously. And it seems like a clear net win to me, and trending in the right direction. And you watch how it plays out. We shouldn't. You hope for the best, but you assume the worst. And the beauty of tools like Bitcoin is that it empowers individuals to take matters into their own hands and not have to rely on someone else to get shit done for them.
Yeah, I would also say, just to add to that politically, if you are a shitcoiner who's attacking Bitcoin, that is effectively you throwing the baby out with the bathwater, because Bitcoin is pristine in a way that your shitcoin is not. And so if you're trying to regulate against it, your shitcoin or various shitcoins that are like your shitcoin are likely to be even worse examples or recipients of that type of regulation, right? And so I think that to be bullish on Sachs here, I agree with what Matt said. It's amazing that we have a crypto czar in the first place. We were going to have a world in which we were going to be constantly attacked and maligned. and Elizabeth Warren was going to get a lot of power and be able to wield it against us in a way that was very, it would have been a much harder 4 years. We would have made it through, but it was going to be tough. And then I think that Sachs and the guys like Sachs, I don't think they're hardcore Bitcoin maxis, but I think they respect Bitcoin. I think they realize that Bitcoin is a very important part of the story. And I do believe Sachs has owned Bitcoin for quite a long time, probably longer than many of the listeners of this podcast, right? And he talks to people who I would consider more Bitcoin maxi, like Balaji Srinivasan or Chamath Palihapitiya. I mean, neither of those people are actual Bitcoin maxis, but they're more Bitcoin maxi, and they certainly understand the Bitcoin case.
It's another case of we don't exist in a vacuum, right? Like Chamath is clearly not a Bitcoin first person, but he's also clearly a Bitcoiner. I think actually like the shitcoin stuff, that's past cycle shit. Like shitcoins have never been a threat to Bitcoin. They're a threat to individuals that speculate on them. They're the threat to retail who thinks, oh, this is Bitcoin 2.0, and they lose their life savings buying that instead of stacking sats. But they've never been an actual threat to Bitcoin, and that has become more and more apparent, I think, over time. I think that's almost standard logic now. Like very few people are arguing that some latest and greatest shitcoin is the new Bitcoin. What they do say is that it's better than Solana or it's better than Ethereum. They're like all gunning for each other, but not Bitcoin. It's like Bitcoin and everything else. The bigger concern I have with this new like tech elite rising to power is actually only tangentially Bitcoin related. And that's like, they seem very, pro-automation, pro-surveillance. Like I could 100% see them be like, oh, you want to secure the border? Well, the best way for us to secure the border is if everyone had biometric, scan everyone's eyeballs. Let's do the full scan of eyeballs. We'll have the Android drones, policing everybody and making sure like you're doing your speech is correct. We'll hook in all the Ring cameras, like that tech surveillance elite thing where they're all about that type of policy is a concern and obviously has knock-on effects for any freedom-loving Bitcoiner. But the whole shitcoin versus Bitcoin thing, like I think Sachs is almost perfectly aligned with Bitcoin in that regard. I mean, you even see someone like Trump, right? He launches his shitcoin, like they're all going to do their own like shitcoin games or whatever. It doesn't really matter to Bitcoin.
Does that surveillance elite thing not concern you with Bitcoin though, in the sense that they could be like, yeah, just own the ETF, bro. You can't have self-custody Bitcoin.
I think that the technologists understand that, they also are anti-TradFi. I don't think that the West Coast really likes East Coast traditional financial elites. Like that's not something that's within their purview. So they would much rather have it, be unleashed from a technological standpoint. So I think we're in alignment there with them. I would say another thing is, just thinking about the tech elites or what Balaji calls the grays, right? You got the reds, the blues, the grays, the oranges were the oranges. The grays are the tech elites. And there's been a fracturing between the grays and the reds in just the last couple of days. Over Christmas, there was a big discussion on Twitter about the H-1B immigration status. And, effectively the tech elites, just to sum up the conversation, the tech elites want unlimited or uncapped H-1B immigration. And the MAGA movement is saying, wait a minute, we're anti-immigration. And also we feel like a lot of this H-1B stuff is you gaming the system in order to undercut American workers. And then they're finding, because the way it's billed is that the H-1B thing is the elite of the elite, and it's America skimming the cream from the rest of the world, which is great. I think everybody agrees with that. But then you dig into the details and you're finding out that actually we're hiring a lot of junior devs and undercutting Americans. And the MAGA movement is not happy about that, especially because these are the same people that were censored and abused by the tech elite during the Biden administration, because the tech elite are weak cowards with no spine, and they'll basically like do whatever the powerful person telling them which direction should we march, how high should we jump, et cetera. So I think we're seeing a fracturing already between MAGA and the grays, and it's Trump as decider and king. Like, who will figure out, which direction to split the baby?
They live in their own little bubble, right? Because they can have privacy, but everyone else doesn't get it. And they're cool with that. And they'll just live that hypocrisy. They'll just bold-face live that hypocrisy and be fine with it. That's what their actions have shown in the past. I think that's what their actions show in the future. I mean, you have a perfect example of it with Elon himself. There's this guy who makes an Elon jet tracker because it's public information, and you could see where it lands everywhere you go. And he also has like a Zuckerberg jet tracker and all the different tech billionaires. They're banned from every platform. You can get them on Nostr, but they're banned on every platform because they want privacy themselves, but they don't want other people to have privacy, and their actions have spoken loudly in that regard. Now, the key here, and this is how they whitewash it, is they don't think the government should surveil you directly. What they think is we should privatize it. They should make billions of dollars off of that surveillance and then sell it as government contracts to the government, ending around our Constitution, because the Constitution doesn't say the government can't buy it from third-party companies. The government It says the government can't surveil us without a warrant. And we've seen that in practice as well. The government right now is using quote-unquote anonymized location data that different advertisers get from our phones as the main way of tracking people about where they go and who they see.
Luigi Mangione was caught at a McDonald's, right? And McDonald's has those self-serve kiosks now. And I'm pretty goddamn sure that they got his face off of that self-serve kiosk and sent the data directly to the FBI. Pretty sure.
There's no chance that was just a McDonald's worker that found him.
It's zero chance. It's honestly a zero. I think that, Danny, before you go real quick, I just want to say, like, on Matt's point here is that I think as Bitcoiners, we should view all of these relationships we have, these parasocial relationships, whether it's with tech elites or Wall Street guys or politicians, as ambivalent relationships. These people are our frenemies. Okay, we're not actually in full alignment with them, and we should, when they're useful to us, we should use them, and when they're not, we should dispense with them. Period.
See, I agree with that, but I want Odell to answer that question, because are you not concerned about this, like surveillance coming to Bitcoin?
I am, but once again, like the status quo is horrible, right? The status quo is horrible. Like 99% of users that come into Bitcoin pre-ETF were coming in through exchanges that required full identifiable information, and they were reporting all of that to the government. And with their full Bitcoin transaction history. Now, obviously, the ETFs take that another step above, right? Where you can't even withdraw or deposit it. But I will say that when Robinhood first came onto one of the things I got wrong was when Robinhood first came onto the landscape, into the industry, and started offering Bitcoin, I never a million years thought they were going to open up withdrawals and deposits, self-custody Bitcoin anytime soon. And they did it within like 8-10 months maybe after launching Bitcoin. And why did they do that? They did it because they had to compete in a free market. They had to compete in a world where other people could do that. So I think, is the status quo good? No, it's horrible. We've been under attack for very long. I think one of the key things here is that users get to decide how they interact with this thing, right? And at the end of the day, like, we can say like, oh, an ETF's an IOU, it's not real Bitcoin. Like, I'm also not going to tell someone they can't buy the ETF. Like, they have to make their own decision on how they want to interact with Bitcoin. And the fact of the matter is, we need to give people the avenues that they can use Bitcoin as freedom money. But then ultimately, those people have to choose whether or not they use it. And that'll always be, I think, a longer stretch. Personal responsibility takes responsibility, which means it's more difficult. And most people will not take the difficult path unless they have to take that path. So I think it's really two different questions. I would say, if you want to use the Samurai case specifically, their outlook on that case is way rosier today than it was 6 months ago. And It's still not rosy, don't get me wrong, but the bar was incredibly low of where we were sitting. And, maybe there's a non-zero chance we see a pardon, depending on how that case plays out. You can't, who the hell knows? I don't really know, but...
Yeah, or more likely drop the case is something I've been hearing from some of the attorneys who are working on the Samurai case, is that before they had no hope, and now with the incoming administration, they think that there's actually a non-trivial chance that they just straight up drop the case, which would be fantastic for the Samurai guys and for Bitcoin privacy in general. So I want to pull on something Matt said about, because I think this is important going forward, about the ETFs, that you can't withdraw or deposit from the ETFs. That's currently correct. But I expect that to change in the new year. So I had heard some months ago from a representative at BlackRock that they were going to seek like-kind treatment as soon as Gary Gensler was removed, and they expected him to be removed no matter what the outcome of the election was. By the way, that tells you how much power they have. They were just waiting for him to be fucking removed, right? So anyway, he's already tendered his resignation. He'll be out soon. BlackRock will seek like-kind treatment. When they seek like-kind treatment, you will be able to put Bitcoin into the ETFs and withdraw Bitcoin from the ETFs. So what does that mean? That means that Bitcoiners are now going to be able to put Bitcoin into the ETF, then margin against the ETF, all without cap gains, right? And so you can run a buy, borrow, die strategy, the same strategy that Michael Saylor is always talking about, where you can spend fiat debt and keep your Bitcoin intact. That's going to be incredibly seductive for a lot of Bitcoiners. It's seductive to me when I hear the idea, and I think to myself, like, but why would I do that? I want to keep control of my Bitcoin. Like, I don't want to give it to BlackRock. But then I'm like, oh, free money. I could use the free money for things, whatever. So, like, I understand where Bitcoiners are going to be at with this, and I kind of want to, like, I'm not raising a red flag, but I'm just saying, like, this is something that's going to be a big deal over the next, like, let's say 4 to 5 years of Bitcoiners engaging with these types of products. And I'm not really yet sure what the second and third order effects of doing that are going to be, but it certainly is going to mean that more Bitcoin are finding its way into the traditional financial system.
Yeah, I mean, this is where I was going with the Robinhood analogy, and then I got a little bit distracted. But yeah, like, this is because of competition, right? And so BlackRock wants the ability for you to deposit and withdraw Bitcoin from their ETFs because they want to be competitive in a global free market. Now, the other piece here is there's competition between countries. Now, a little bit less so with the United States because we have one of the most predatory exit taxes in the world that keeps us locked in here, even though I have no intention of leaving the country regardless. I'm very grateful that I was born here and I can raise my family here, build businesses here. We have a very predatory exit tax, but you're seeing globally what you're seeing happening is governments that are very harsh on Bitcoin, very negative against Bitcoin. People are moving to jurisdictions that are very beneficial to Bitcoin. There's a free market competition happening. And to a lesser extent in America as well. If America is not careful, we'll start to see more and more Americans leaving, paying the exit tax, paying their 30% or whatever, long-term cap gains, so 20%, paying the exit tax, and then never coming back and building businesses other places. So that competition is our major advantage we have in this global system. Now, to HODL's specific point about depositing Bitcoin into an ETF and then loaning against it, I mean, we already see Bitcoiners doing that. There's self-custody ways to do that, like with Unchained or whatever. You'll get way better terms if you do it with something like an ETF. And yeah, I think of that as a lobster trap. These are the types of soft incentives we see of capturing as much Bitcoin as possible, because you wave a dog treat or you wave some lobster bait and you get them into the trap, so that everything that's happening and Bitcoin's being used in more of a permissioned way. I see how it could benefit certain people, and maybe that tactic makes sense depending on stack size and depending on threat modeling or whatnot. But this is the technique we've seen even with self-custody stuff, right? So like Unchained, for example. Unchained allows you to do self-custody loans against your Bitcoin. Why would you do that? Well, the rates are actually incredibly high. I think last I checked, they were like 14%. At one point, they were 12%. But the reason you do it is because you're arbitraging against cap gains tax. So if long-term cap gains tax is 20-ish%, you're saving money by borrowing against your Bitcoin instead of selling it outright, which is what we see all rich people do with all of their assets, right? They are always borrowing against their assets. They're not selling it. It's their loophole to get around the tax treatment. Now, the negative there is you are attaching that, even though you're not giving up custody, you're attaching that to your identity. You're attaching that to your identity, and you're linking your transaction history going past and forward with your identity to shave off that 6%, 7% arbitrage opportunity. So the reverse is true too. That means that if you want to keep relative privacy with your funds, you have to end up paying an additional 7% over someone who doesn't, right? And there's an additional cost of using Bitcoin in a freedom-oriented way. And I think we'll just see that continue. That trend will continue. It'll always be more expensive, and it'll always be less convenient to use Bitcoin in a freedom-oriented way than use it in a captured way.
I don't know if you've seen, but you can actually already do in-kind deposits and redemptions with the monochrome ETF in Australia. I know that the US doesn't give a fuck about what happens in Australia, but it's true. So
Where's
if we
Australia?
have this, it's the big place, really far south. Did you know? Sorry, if we get this strategic Bitcoin reserve, hat tip to Marty Bent here. What are the chances of a super cycle?
Fucking a bajillion %. What do you mean? Like it's going to go straight to $1 million if we get $1 million.
$1 million is not a super cycle.
Right. Well, something that's more, I mean, I don't even know if it's based on the SBR, but I think it's based on the ETFs more, because when you saw the gold ETF come in, gold had a 8-year bull market, right? And gold was just up. And so I think for Bitcoin, if that does occur, like we could have an 8-year like Bitcoin bull market where it's just like a new all-time high every year. But then also like we're constantly still getting 50% drawdowns because this is fucking Bitcoin and the volatility is not going to go away. So it would be this weird thing where like new all-time highs consistently over the course of like a decade, but also like lots of 50% and 30% drawdowns on the way.
Right, like a cycle break.
Yeah.
I would just say, like, I think it's important to be definitionally accurate in terms of when you talk about these things. Like, if you're going to say super cycle, right? We have 3 cycles that we can compare against. We have the 2012 cycle, the 2016 cycle, and the 2020 cycle. Now, the 2020 cycle, I think, was artificially suppressed and broken because of FTX, Celsius, Grayscale, Barry Silbert, all the different paper Bitcoin games that were played out and then blew up. So it didn't go as high as it would and went lower than it would have in the bear. So if you go and then you compare it to the 2016 halving cycle, right? And why are there cycles? There are cycles because every 4 years on average, Bitcoin has this pre-planned supply shock, but because people are retarded, it's not priced in. Like at some point, you'd expect all future halvings to be priced in, but we're still far away from that. So if you compare it to the 2016 cycle, if it was exactly the same top and bottom of the 2016 cycle, you're talking roughly 2 million Bitcoin top, 400,000 Bitcoin bottom. Now, I think like some people without thinking about the math would be like, oh my God, that's a super cycle. That's insane. Like, how did we pump that much? No, that's just doing what we did in 2016. Yeah. So I think you'd have to see, for it to be definitionally considered a super cycle, you'd have to see it blow past $2 million. I don't think there's many people that are calling for that right now. I would love to see that. I'd be cool with seeing that. But what I expect here is we'll see a slightly amplified traditional cycle because of nation state FOMO, because of ETFs, because of all this new money that has been unlocked. We'll see a cycle that probably would have been amplified if you didn't factor in that new demand compared to not factoring that new demand. But I still expect at some point an 80% drawdown where everyone gets wrecked. And when that'll happen, I don't know when that'll happen. It'll happen when we're all incredibly bullish and we think it's not going to happen. And the important contrast, I think, with gold is like gold is, bowling with bumpers. Like there's circuit breakers, like it's a completely controlled market. Like Bitcoin is the closest thing to a free market humanity's ever seen. And humans are inherently volatile and we panic and we do all this crazy shit. We do degenerate shit. All the suits are going to do crazy degenerate stuff that we can't even imagine. Like we're already seeing the early innings of it. Vivek is launching an ETF that buys Bitcoin bonds, the bonds that are then lent to MicroStrategy, so MicroStrategy can buy Bitcoin, while Bitwise is making an ETF that buys the Bitcoin company, buys the companies that buys the Bitcoin, and they're going to do all this different stuff on top of all that stuff and collect fees and everything. So the degeneracy is going to be ridiculous. There's no circuit breakers. People will panic, and we'll probably have another 80% drawdown at some point. And I would say that would also break the definition of super cycle, which is like we wouldn't have like a traditional bear market-ish type of scenario.
By the way, if you know how to read between Matt's lines, that sounded a lot to me like he was calling for a $3 million Bitcoin price.
No price predictions this cycle for me. No. When I'm making the price predictions, it was probably we're about to dump. But I'll just say outright, like my strategy is quite left curve IQ. Like I just humbly am all in. As I try and increase my cash flow as much as possible, so the amount of money I make as much as possible, try and reduce my family's expenses as much as possible. The remainder goes into Bitcoin. And then I just spend it as life expenses happen. So if there is an 80% drop, I will not expect it. I will probably hold all the way to the bottom, and I will just be constantly spending when I need to spend. And I will not be trying to trade these markets.
I am the same. I am 100% all in. I will be hodling through the next significant correction, and I will cry a little bit, but not a lot, just a little bit. And then I'll just get on my big boy pants and I'll keep hodling. That's my plan.
What's your $1 million bottle of wine, HODL?
1989 Chateau
Have you already got it?
Haut-Brion.
Do you already have it?
Nobody knows what that is, but I'll pull it up.
It's ridiculous.
You actually already have it.
That's nice. It looks nice.
Yeah.
You've not written on it yet, HODL.
No, I didn't write on it yet. But this is, we're pulling this boy out.
How much does that bottle cost?
In sats or in dollar?
In sats.
In sats, it's 2.7 million sats.
Okay.
Give or take.
So currently $2,700.
I mean, that's pretty humble at $1 million.
So at $1 million, well, not measured in sats, it's like $27,000.
Oh, I want HODL for this. He's our MicroStrategy influencer right now. Have you ever owned MicroStrategy, Matt?
No, I don't own stock.
No, me neither. So
The only thing I own is I own private equity in Bitcoin startups through 1031, and then I own Bitcoin. I don't have public equities.
all right, you said you were 100% in HODL, but
But he will when some of those companies go public.
Yeah, what HODL just said is like the goal for a lot of these companies is to go public. So then at that point, I would.
I'm 100% all in Bitcoin and Bitcoin related companies. It's all Bitcoin shit. Like it's funny to me because sometimes people, like really puritanical Bitcoiners, give me shit because they're like, "How fucking could you, dude? You're a fucking American HODL, bro, and you own MicroStrategy. Fuck you. You're fucking phony. Fuck you, dude." And it's like, listen, guys, I had a retirement account before I got here. And then I YOLO'd it all into Bitcoin shit back in 2015, 16. Like, what do you want from me? I did the best I could.
Yeah, I mean, that's the key difference, right? It's like I never had a retirement account. And maybe like the accountants out there are like, oh, like you should have done it. You could have done self-directed or whatever. But like I never had a company provide me one. I never went out and did it myself. I found Bitcoin when I was pretty young. You know, my biggest issue was that I was poor when I found it. And so like my retirement account is just stacking sats. So that's the difference.
I'll also say that a lot of my MSTR position is actually in my wife's account because she had a dumb 401k from her old job, and like this was like back in 2020 or whatever. And I was listening to a Michael Saylor podcast, and I was like, this guy gets it, man. And I was like, hey, you still have that dumb 401k? And she was like, yeah. And I was like, give it to me. And I just put it all in the MSTR.
So how many companies do you think are going to blow themselves up trying to do the MicroStrategy play this cycle?
Well, it's going to be a popular copycat trade on Wall Street, especially, I had thought that if anybody copied MicroStrategy, it would be somebody above him, like a Meta or something. But actually, it's the opposite. And all these companies underneath him are also running the strategy for themselves. And now they're Bitwise has a ETF that is going to you're allowed to be in the ETF if you have 1,000 Bitcoin on your corporate balance sheet. So any company with 1,000 Bitcoin can get a weighting in Bitwise's new Bitcoin Treasury ETF. I don't remember what the name of it is. But I think that's going to be a popular trade because if you're a loser, nothing burger of a company, you're out here making like sinks and faucets or something. I don't know what companies do, but something like that. And then you just say to yourself, hey, fuck these sinks and faucets or whatever. Let's buy 1,000 Bitcoin, get added to this ETF, financialize the fuck out of this company. That seems like a lot of companies are going to do that. And now, could there be something there that's like some sort of weird, human centipede daisy chain of awful leverage in the commodities bond market, blah, blah, blah? I don't know. Probably.
Well, because you have this is still the early innings, right? But you have two ETFs. You have one is the Bitwise one, which incentivizes the companies to get to 1,000 Bitcoin. And then there's the Strive Funds one, which is Vivek's company, which buys their bonds, which incentivizes them to take out debt to get to there, right? And this is just the early innings. This is just very basic stuff that is getting pushed out there. I'm a little bit... So there's a couple of things. First of all, challengers, we've said this from the beginning. challengers first. They have nothing to lose, right? And so we're seeing that with this Bitcoin treasury strategy, the MicroStrategy strategy. And then I also believe that at the end of the day, every company will have this strategy. Every person will have this strategy. Every government will have this strategy. You make profit and you hold your profit in Bitcoin. Like every person will own Bitcoin as their personal reserve asset. Every company will, every government will. It's just saving good money, right? So there's this interim period here. And I do wonder, like, how much, like, it's basically an arbitrage opportunity in this, like, fiat transition period. But, like, I don't know how effective it'll be for company number 35 or number 50 or something in terms of, like, the arbitrage. Of like it's still good to own Bitcoin. Like, you should own hard assets. But at some point, like the most successful ones we've seen are like in different jurisdictions, right? So like MetaPlanet is in Japan. You can't easily buy MicroStrategy in Japan. So you buy the knockoff MicroStrategy in MetaPlanet. But like the number 45th American company to do this, like they're not in, their MicroStrategy is so far ahead and he has such good, strong brand and like reputation and reliability in terms of what you get. Like, why are you buying that instead of buying MicroStrategy? Like that, I still haven't wrapped my head around. Like I think like the market is not properly pricing this stuff because it's just so new.
Well, I think one reason you might buy it is that it's a classic value investor play. And
I've lost HODL. Can you hear him?
No, but
oh shit, can you hear me?
he's being recorded locally, right? So I assume, did you just make a compelling point that we didn't hear?
It was very compelling. Can you hear me now? Okay. Yeah, one thing I was going to say is that it's one reason you might do it is it's a classic value investor play in where the the share price is the total market cap of the company is trading below their holdings of Bitcoin. So anytime you can find that, it just recently happened with this little shitcoin called GNS, which holds like $16 million worth of Bitcoin or whatever. And what was funny was I was like, oh, hey, this is a good buy because it's below the net asset value of the Bitcoin. So I bought some and then it dipped even harder. So I was like, all right, I guess I gotta buy some more because it's still, my thesis is still intact, right? So yeah, as a value investor, that might be one reason why you would do it.
Yeah, but that's like the floor price, right? Like the floor price is assets minus liabilities, right? Like who knows? Like
why would you pay a premium? Yeah,
like
I don't know.
Like
I don't know.
I think there's a strong argument, and once again, don't own MicroStrategy. I'm not encouraging people to buy it, but I think there's a strong argument that his premium is not only justified, but it's below market in terms of what his premium is. And he's made very compelling arguments that, like, if you do a revenue multiple on like an Apple or NVIDIA, like that premium is way higher than if you're doing a similar multiple on MicroStrategy. But I don't know. I don't know how these smaller, random bullshit companies that own basically no Bitcoin can justify any kind of significant premium, and they're all kind of diluting themselves. It's also like shitcoin. It's like shitcoins. It's like every time there's another one, like they're all in the same pile of bullshit.
So I do own a little bit of like Semler, and I own like a tiny amount of GNS. I took a flyer on that one, but like in general, like most of the money I have allocated in sort of this Bitcoin treasury space is 100. It's like 97% to MicroStrategy because I think this is going to be a winner take all market. Like I think MicroStrategy is going to be the 800-pound gorilla in terms of like Bitcoin treasury.
Well, what is your opinion? The other piece is like. Sorry, Danny, this is my show now. What is your opinion on like if a big dog comes in, right? Like if these guys hold so much cash,
Like a Meta.
yeah, Meta or an Apple, right. Yeah.
I think that the reason why the MicroStrategy premium would continue to endure, even if Meta, because one thing you have to remember is that when people copy this strategy or ape this strategy, it pumps the price of Bitcoin, which meaningfully pump sailors' bags. And so there's this virtual accretive flywheel where the more people that's why he spends so much time on podcasts, open sourcing his playbook, because the more people that, employ his playbook, the more his underlying holdings go up and the more he can do. So I think like if you have a large Meta or Google or whoever come in and start doing the strategy, number one, they're not going to be able to fully commit to the strategy like Saylor. Number two, it's accretive to Saylor's bottom line. And number three, I think Saylor will already be well positioned in the market and have the capital partners. He's already part of the QQQ, which means that the type of debt offerings that he's able to get, they're not. It's not on the same level as like what Meta's able to get because they're part of the QQQ and the S&P 500. But I think probably within a year, MicroStrategy will be part of the S&P 500 as well, and it just allows him to do even more of the things he's already doing now, in addition to the passive flows. Because once you're part of the Qs and once you're part of SPY, then the flows that most people in their 401k. By the way, if you don't know what we're talking about, most people in their 401k don't know what they're investing in. They just buy a broad market of basket of index funds, and they don't even know now that they own MicroStrategy. Which, by the way, this is a great thing for people who hold the NASDAQ, because you now have Bitcoin exposure, even though you're too stupid to understand anything about Bitcoin. So boom, 400,000 Bitcoin just found their way into your portfolio. That's pretty sweet, right? And you're getting like a market cap weighted adjustment on that. But like, let's say, I think it's 0.4% or 0.46 or something right now. We know about Bitcoin Sharpe ratio, that if you add 1% Bitcoin to a portfolio allocation, that it outperforms over time, massively so. And so that 1% continues to grow. It moves higher up in the weightings. It gets higher up in your personal portfolio. The entire NASDAQ is buoyed by the Bitcoin, et cetera, et cetera. It's a massive deflationary force that's been added to the NASDAQ and will soon be added to the S&P 500. So not only is MicroStrategy good for MicroStrategy shareholders, it's good for pensioners and different indexers across the board.
See,
which is pretty crazy.
I get that argument in terms of like a 401k or an index fund, but there's obviously a lot of people who are just investing in this. And what I can't is, like, last bear market, it traded at like a pretty significant discount. And so what would make you think that it won't just drop massively in price next bear market? Which I think there will be. I don't believe this.
I think it will. I think it will. Saylor's been on record continuously saying volatility is vitality. So if you're in MicroStrategy and you expect it not to be volatile, Saylor and the team, who are running the treasury strategy, they want it volatile, because volatility is the product that they're actually selling their customers. And the customers are not you, the retail trader. The customers are the guys that are doing the convertible notes and the bond offerings and the convertible debt.
Even downside volatility?
Yeah, they want both, because they can hedge it both ways and make money both ways. Volatility is good for the bond traders.
Why is downward volatility good though?
Well, they just have different, sophisticated strategies where they're putting on options trades on either side and collaring the trade, and then Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we hear you.
Oh, okay. I think Matt's just laughing at me because I'm explaining high level bond leverage trading.
Yes, that's why I'm laughing.
I'm an expert in as well, by the way, just to let you know. But I mean, basically they like it because they can arbit either direction. It's pretty easy to see. They just, take a trade going short or long, depending on what they think the market is going to do.
This episode is brought to you by River. There are many places to buy Bitcoin, but there's no exchange like River. They have innovative products, phone support, and a dedication to security that I haven't seen anywhere else. With River, buying Bitcoin is easy. You can set up zero-fee recurring buys to automatically build your stack, and while you're waiting for the perfect buying opportunity, River even lets you earn daily Bitcoin interest on your cash balance, which outperforms most high-yield savings accounts. Your Bitcoin is stored safely in multi-sig cold storage, plus you have peace of mind knowing that River has monthly proof of reserves and holds all client Bitcoin that wasn't withdrawn to self-custody. Open an account for yourself or your business at river.com/WBD. That's river.com/WBD.
I'm just going to keep buying Bitcoin. Right, we've been going for an hour and a half, and I know that HODL's got limited time. So tell me what's going on with Nostr this year, Matt?
Nostr's blooming. I feel like momentum's quite strong. So Nostr is, to your listeners who don't know, Nostr is a protocol for speech that has a lot of similarities to Bitcoin. So Bitcoin is freedom money. It's a freedom money protocol that allows you to spend and save without permission. And Nostr is a protocol that allows you to communicate without permission. It also has an identity element. And it uses a public key, private key pair similar to Bitcoin. So with Bitcoin, you generate a private key and a public key to store your Bitcoin. In Nostr, you do the same to create your account or your identity. And then you can communicate with the world in a verifiable way, in a signed, verified way. So you know that there's no fake news. You know, if I say something, it's what I said. And we can build a bunch of stuff on top of it. And what's really cool is it's incredibly complementary with Bitcoin. So we've integrated Bitcoin payments. You can send zaps to each other. In its current form, the most usable current form of it is basically a social media competitor that you can't get banned on, you can't get censored, and you can send Bitcoin to each other without permission. The easiest way to use that is an app called Primal, which you can just download in your app store. So I would just implore people to download it and try it out and just play around with it. But the cool part is there's 100 plus, way more than that, apps that accept Nostr keys, so you can just move between apps. Once you create your key, you can create as many keys as you want, just like Bitcoin. Once you create your key, you can just move between apps, have the experience you want to have. We don't have all the Bitcoiners on Nostr yet, but we do have the best Bitcoiners, and I encourage you to join us.
Yeah, it's funny. Me and Matt were talking about this yesterday, but I'm a frequent Nostr user and a poster, and I'm always on Nostr. I like Nostr more than I like Twitter. I feel like Nostr is like a version of the world in where Bitcoin has won, and it's a preview of how that's going to look. And Twitter is the world as it currently exists, where we're still fighting to win. One thing I love about Nostr, by the way, is Nostr feels very much currently like the early internet, in that there's no algorithmic like sort of control, and you realize like when you're on all these other social media platforms that your mind is being fucking corrupted and brainwashed by the engagement bait algorithms. And when you have just a normal timeline based algorithm, you just don't feel that upset about things anymore. You're like, no big deal, whatever. But when the algorithm knows the thing that enrages you and then it shoves it into your feed right at the top. I mean, I swear, I wake up and I open Twitter, and every day I see 6 murders, and it's like I'm habituated to that at this point, and seeing 6 murders before breakfast does nothing to me anymore, which is probably not a good mental place to be as a human being. It should shock you when you see a murder on video, right? But it doesn't if you're a frequent Twitter user. That said, like Nostr is, it's just a really good vibe, man. I mean, that's the reason to go hang out over there. Is like, the vibe is good, the people are good. You get it feels like a mental break from the rest of social media, and it's all our favorite people talking about our favorite subject, Bitcoin, and building out the future in a meaningful way. Like Primal, I think, is a really interesting example, because Primal bills itself as a social Bitcoin wallet, and if you start to think about Nostr as less of a social media and more of a social Bitcoin wallet, you start to realize like, oh, there are these really cool like ways we can do capital formation on here. We can have different types of community on here. We can do charity on here. We can send each other zaps. We can do value for value. I mean, there's just a million things that come with like having money embedded into the social media feed. And other social media feeds are going to try and do that as well, but I don't think they're going to do it in the same way that Nostr clients are able to do it, because it's primary on Nostr, and also Nostr is a strong Bitcoin first focus and ethos. So that makes the difference.
All right, tell me if I'm mid-curving this, because obviously, like what you're talking about here is Nostr or social media. When I first saw Nostr, I thought we were going to get way more radical shit. Like I thought there would be like drugs markets on Nostr and all sorts of stuff, but it seems to have like kind of got stuck in social media right now. What am I missing something?
No, I think first of all, there's an order of operations to these types of things. I think first and foremost, the protocol does not use a blockchain, because that would be retarded. Is the trade-off model prioritizes censorship resistance, not privacy, which is a key thing to keep in mind here. So you can broadcast to the world, but if you're not careful, the world might know your IP address and might figure out who you are. So that's one reason why we haven't seen, straight up illegal things being done on Nostr. So even though they can't stop you from doing it, they can figure out who you are and then put a gun to your head and do good old-fashioned law enforcement. So the one piece here is Elon's takeover X and his illusion of free speech, and they're like in like this honeymoon period, which has slowed our adoption down a little bit. I think at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if he's a god among men and he actually means well. having a central ruler and control will always be corrupted and always break down. You can't have centralized control over this. It shouldn't be why did someone get banned. It's why were they able to get banned in the first place. The second piece here is on HODL's comment about algorithms. I think algorithms get a bad rap. I think actual people want algorithms. There's a reason why TikTok is so successful and has 2 billion people on it. And that's because the algorithm addicts them and makes discovery easier. Now, the problem and the reason why people just automatically assume algorithms are bad is following incentives. And our current exposure to algorithms are centrally controlled algorithms that are black boxes that are designed around the surveillance ad model, addicting you as much as possible, selling your data to advertisers, and selling you product. You are the product. You're not the user. You're the product of the service you're using. And they're basically milking you. You're like cattle, and they're just milking you for as much data and surveillance as possible, and they need you addicted. Now, we've already protocolized a spec in Nostr that lets anyone create an algorithm. So you can choose which algorithm you want to use. You can choose no algorithm. You can make your own algorithm. Someone else can choose your algorithm. So you have choice, and you have different options in how you want to use it. And you can even use it, of course, without an algorithm. And then the last piece I would say is this idea that I've heard this many times. I like Nostr, but not for its social media uses, is similar to saying I like blockchain but not Bitcoin. The social media aspect is what is letting us bootstrap this verifiable reputation system, this network of keys that follow each other, that communicate with each other. Like that is what is bootstrapping everything. The PGP guys tried to bootstrap Web of Trust for years. They couldn't do it. It turns out you need to be able to post memes and post shit posts in order to actually bootstrap this stuff. And the perfect example of a non-social media use case that is not illegal that I would put out there is something like Airbnb. I've used Airbnb for 10 years. I'm a great guest. I have great reputation, but I'm stuck in their walled garden. I can't use my Airbnb rating or my Uber rating for other things. I have to use it with their product or service. In a Nostr world, you can take this verifiable reputation and you can use it for all sorts of things outside of that walled garden. It gives users more choice. It lets the free market run wild. You have Bitcoin at the core. And none of these tech giants, yes, they could theoretically compete. Yes, X could add Nostr support. They could add Open Lightning support. None of them are going to do it because they like their walled gardens. Their walled gardens are their entire product. They're walling themselves in more, not less. And it's similar to me, once again, everything I view as a Bitcoin lens, and that's one of the beauties of Nostr is it's bootstrapped by Bitcoiners, is Saifedean's argument about Bitcoin. Like the biggest risk to Bitcoin, he's always said this, is that governments were going to responsibly manage their currencies and switch to the gold standard and not carry debt, which, yes, theoretically you could say that, but if you're not retarded, you know that's never going to happen. They're just never going to do that. And it's the same case here. Like you have to start from grassroots, foundational, make it corruption resistant at the core, otherwise it'll be corrupted.
And there's obviously loads of people that have like criticized Nostr as like maybe it's not censorship resistant. Do you think that it's proven that it's censorship resistant yet?
Look, I make every post in caps. That pisses off a lot of people and they can't stop me.
You know that's not what I'm talking about though.
I mean, it kind of is why I started it, you know, is like I always joked around like the first censorship war of Nostr was going to be caps versus no caps. I think, you know, a lot of these things are theoretical. And the way Nostr works is, so anyone can run a server, we call them relays, and anyone can broadcast messages to relays. And then you can read from any relays you want. So there's no like strong guarantees of who will run the relays, just like who will build the roads, you know, who will store your notes. But if you're someone like the President of the United States or someone influential or saying something that matters, thousands of people are going to store your shit. And the beauty of having it all signed is that you know it hasn't been changed. So anyone can store your shit, and then anyone can locally verify that it happened. And I would say, as an example, is we live in a much worse situation right now with status quo social media, right? But whenever something happens, And let's use, HODL already brought up this Luigi guy, the guy who assassinated the healthcare CEO. The first thing they do is they take down their social media. Like whatever the powers that be, call up the other powers that be. They're like, you got to take down the social media. And what do you see? You see 1 million screenshots of everything the guy's posted since like he was 4 years old. And the negative there is we can't verify those screenshots haven't been faked. The difference in Nostr is I can press one button and I can store everything you've ever said locally on my own server. And it can be verified by anyone that I haven't changed it. And so I think that guarantees enough. Like maybe if you're just spamming the network and you're not saying anything interesting, you'll be quote unquote censored. No one will know you said something. But I think overwhelmingly it's just a massive status quo win. And I think anything of importance will just practically not be able to be censored. And I think we only kind of see this as it goes out at scale. That's, the big thing. But the beauty in it is its simplicity. And that's the trade-off you get in the simplicity, that you can't get a hard and fast guarantee that something will be available, that data will be available. Someone's got to store it somewhere.
So are you saying that I am mid-curving this and social media is the killer app for Nostr right now?
You're straight up mid-curving it.
That's okay.
It's the mid-curve meme. Most of life is the mid-curve meme. You can pretty much plant the mid-curve meme on anything.
I also think you should fade, the idea that you need to be maximally in boosting engagement at all times. Even if you have a job like you do, Danny, where you're like a podcast host, right? Like it's like Matt's not on X, and like you could argue that that's a detriment to Matt's, career ambitions, et cetera.
Yeah.
Right. But it's also like you got to engage where you feel called to engage, and not be thinking, hey, what am I getting out of this? Like to me, I use Nostr because I just like it. I like all the people there. I like talking to them about things. I like hanging out there. That's why I'm on there.
Do you engage in Nostr differently to Twitter?
Yes,
I do. Yeah, I much more so. I'm much more open and unguarded on Nostr. Whereas when you go to Twitter, it feels like I don't know. It feels like going into a crowded bar and then just being like, "Who wants to fight?" That's like the vibe on Twitter. On Nostr, it's just like, "Hey, good day, everybody. Pleasant, nice to see you."
I think that's part of just like where we are in the adoption cycle. Like if everyone's using Nostr, it's going to also be we're going to have like the worst people in the world and the best people in the world, just like with Bitcoin. I think Nostr has this, like we see, like once again with my bias on Bitcoin, it has a bootstrapping, not necessarily an issue, but a bootstrapping hurdle, which is in the beginning, people that bootstrap it are actually taking a significant sacrifice, right? Like if it was 2011, everyone's like, oh, I would have bought Bitcoin in 2011. If it was 2011 and you went all in on Bitcoin, your life would be materially more difficult than if you just kept your money in S&P 500 and borrowed against it, and then use the fiat system to conduct your life. But now, if you hold Bitcoin, your life is materially better. And I see the same thing happening with Nostr. Particularly, we'll use Danny as an example again. Like I've talked to Danny and Peter at length over the years. It's like, what if Twitter just bans you? Like you are materially worse off, right? And so as Nostr bootstraps and then Nostr becomes the standard, you end up in the opposite situation where Nostr is the only place in the world where you can post, it can't be changed, it can't be altered with AI, and nobody can stop you, and that empowers people. But you need the bootstrapping mechanism in the beginning, and that requires people to take risk and take some sacrifice. I mean, to HODL's point, I think one example I've had is on the venture side, there is a venture fund that will go unnamed that like in their raising deck, I've seen their raising deck list their blue checks and the number of followers they have on Twitter, right? And instead, I've deleted my X. And so like, does that put a disadvantage? Yes, it puts a slight disadvantage, but I think the benefits get paid out in generations. And it takes people to actually take that risk and move the ball forward for this to actually happen. And then everyone else gets to benefit too. But the people that take the risks in the beginning tend to benefit more from, just like Bitcoin.
Do you benefit more from being Nostr only instead of on Nostr and X?
Yeah, because I can look my kids in the eye and say that I fucking wasn't complicit in that dystopia, right? And I think I also they'll benefit from the freedom benefits long term. And there's look, at the end of the day, like, I think Bitcoin taught a lot of us that it's life is short, lifetime is scarce, and integrity and authenticity and like keeping yourself to a high standard is like the single most important thing. And what's the point of saving in fuck you money if you don't say fuck you sometimes, right? And I'm grateful that I'm in a position where I can still pay my mortgage without my surveillance ad payout on X. Like, that's good. I'm grateful for that.
This episode is brought to you by Casa. For those of you out there who want to protect your Bitcoin, I want to tell you about Casa, the leading Bitcoin self-custody solution. So if you're serious about protecting your Bitcoin, then you need a rock-solid security plan, and Casa gives you just that. With their multi-signature security and key management services, Casa makes it easier than ever to take control of your Bitcoin without the risk of a single point of failure. They offer multiple levels of protection, all designed with simplicity and ease of use in mind, even if you're not a tech expert. Don't leave your Bitcoin security to chance. Go to casa.io and check out their services today to protect your stack and sleep easy. That is casa.io, which is casa.io.
All right, we're like an hour and 40 in and we've done 3 topics. I had like 12. But one thing I do want to talk about.
Let's just lightning round all the rest of
We can lightning round them. But what I do want to mention Ecash, because this year seems to have been like a real breakout year for Ecash. And it's kind of like tied into the Nostr thing a little bit. But I'm curious on your take on this, Odell. Actually, both of you. Because like there's a funny thing with Ecash where it seems like one of the most cypherpunk things happening in Bitcoin right now, but it's also building on sort of custodianship. Where do you think this is going to like fit in the next like 2, 3, 4 years?
So there's only 3 things in my life that I've seen incredibly organic, viral developer interest on the open source side. And without any VC funding, without any kind of top-down planning, and that's Bitcoin, Nostr, and Ecash. They all share that. And so recently I've been way more focused on Nostr and Ecash because there are these fledgling new ecosystems and new projects, and that's always extremely exciting, like being there on the ground floor.
Maybe you should do a quick TLDR on Ecash just in case anyone doesn't know what it is.
Okay, so Bitcoin is a open protocol for freedom money. Lightning is an open protocol for batched freedom money payments, so batched Bitcoin payments. Ecash is an open protocol for Bitcoin banks, and Nostr is an open protocol for communications to link them all together. And so when I say an open protocol for Bitcoin banks with Ecash, is we operate under that we don't live in a vacuum. Most people are using Bitcoin with custodians already. Let's make the custodians as good as possible. And how does Ecash do that? It gives you very strong privacy guarantees. It's programmable, so you can do very interesting things with it. You can make offline payments, which is incredibly useful. If anyone's ever used Apple Pay, one of the really understated important aspects of Apple Pay is that you don't need reception to tap your iPhone and make a payment. A lot of the world, like if you want to have reliable payments, you need to be able to do offline payments. And then the last piece is an interoperable protocol. So it separates the custodian from the app. If you use the Strike app, you have to use Strike as your custodian. And and everything that comes with it. You have no user choice. If you use a Cashew app like Cashew.me, you get to pick your custodian when you start up. So you can have this global marketplace for custodians that are competing on reliability and fees and reputation. And just to bring it all back to the 4 open protocols, that reputation and communication can be done using Nostr, and payments between them can be done using Lightning. And so it all comes together and all compounds on each other. But to the end user, what is the end user getting out of this? Maybe their eyes are rolling over. It makes it incredibly easy, incredibly cheap, and incredibly fast, and incredibly private for you to make Bitcoin payments, with the main trade-off being that you're trusting someone else with holding your Bitcoin and you have the custodial risk.
To me, the coolest thing is that it like removes all the shitty UX from Bitcoin. Like it just works really well. Like obviously with that you have the trade-off of having custodian, but how do you try and weigh up that balance where you have like this new payment thing, it's building on top of Bitcoin. It seems to be like where Bitcoin is actually going to scale. It works right now, but it's still being built on a custodian.
Well, so Callie, the lead maintainer of Cashew, pushes back on calling it a scaling solution because it's custodial.
Okay.
He thinks anything that's custodial should not be considered scaling. Now, it does give you a lot of the same benefits that a scaling solution would give you, right? Which is low cost, easy payments, with the benefit of being private, offline, and programmable. I think you just think about it, like you should just think about it from a practical sense. Like it's the cash, well, maybe half the listeners or more than half the listeners don't use cash anymore, but it's the cash that people historically have put in their back pocket when they go out at night. You might lose it, you might get robbed, but you keep your savings in cold storage and you use a Cashew wallet for spending. Worst comes to worst, you end up getting rugged by a custodian. You lose, like 0.1% of your savings. It's no big deal. You can survive. You'll be fine. And there's interesting things that can be done here because it's programmable and because it's an open protocol that are being worked on. Stuff like, instead, let's say you have $400 in Cashew. That's different amount for each person depending on what their level of savings is, what their cost of living, whatever. But let's say you have $400 in Cashew. You could actually split that between 10 different custodians, 10 different Cashew mints, and using Lightning multi-part payments, the user doesn't even realize when they make a payment, it can pull from all of them. So then I call that like the Titanic approach, which is maybe not the best metaphor because the Titanic sank, but the Titanic had this concept that if one section of the Titanic leaked, you would only lose that section, you wouldn't lose the whole ship, right? So if one of the mints goes down, you only lose 1/10 of the money you had in there. And like, is that perfect? No, that's not perfect. But like in practical terms, that's like a completely decent trade-off for someone to take.
It worked out good for the Titanic.
Yeah, really great metaphor. I need to fix that metaphor with something else, but it helps me visualize it.
All right, HODL, anything to say on Ecash before you're out?
I don't have any thoughts on Ecash, honestly. Just none.
Have you used it?
No.
So HODL, homework for you. Cashew.me.
Yeah.
CASHU.me. It's a PWA maintained by Callie. You can just run it in your Safari browser on your phone or Chrome on your phone. And then just send, it does Lightning deposits and withdrawals. Just send, a little bit of money in there and play around with it. It's incredible UX with fantastic privacy guarantees.
All right, done. I'm downloading it now.
All right, let's close out with a prediction. I knew I wasn't going to get a prize prediction from Matt, so instead, let's predict who you think the next...
Kind of already did.
Well, you kind of already did. Who the next big public Bitcoin buyer will be?
$3 million.
Because obviously we've had Dorsey, Saylor. Who do you think the next one will be?
Well, I mean, don't we think it's going to be the U.S. government? Isn't that the
No, give me a person.
Yeah, we're already assuming they're doing it.
But an individual. Okay. Let me think. Which individual? Okay. Oh, I said this on the other one, and I'll back it up again. I think that this cycle we're going to see Warren Buffett buy Bitcoin.
Ooh, that's a good one.
So Berkshire Hathaway is going to buy Bitcoin. I think at a certain point it just becomes something you can't ignore. And Buffett is a hardcore capitalist. And now that Charlie's dead, there's nobody to be like, hey, stop doing that. Like he's the only guy. So I think there's a high likelihood that Buffett buys some Bitcoin this cycle.
That's quite a bold call. I think I'd fade that one.
Yeah. No, it's very it's very unlikely to happen. But we're doing fun predictions,
I mean, HODL said this on our show with Mallers, but I think Meta is probably the most likely to be a big company to do it. I think Zuckerberg already has a bag.
Yeah, for sure.
I think there's a strong, compelling argument that he's still salty at the Winklevoss twins, so that gives him an extra incentive. They're sitting on a ton of cash. He has, if he doesn't have control over that company, he has near control over that company in terms of how they proceed. So he has a lot of control over how they move. He's done way worse decisions like changing the name to Meta. So I could see that happening. On a person basis, I don't know. I think everyone's going to own Bitcoin. I think people are not even close to bullish enough. This is going to be a ridiculous cycle in terms of at least the financialization or the Bitcoinization of the financial system. Where, we have Larry Fink is shilling Bitcoin. The BlackRock is the largest. They manage I think over $13 trillion worth of money. Like, I think people don't really, they're the largest shareholder of almost every major company passively. I think people don't appreciate what effect that has in terms of the suits. So that's crazy. And then since this is a year in review, I would say that I think one of the biggest things that people are sleeping on that we didn't bring up is the BitKey from Block, their hardware wallet. I don't know if you guys have used it, but it's effectively retard proof. It's like almost impossible to lose your Bitcoin. And so in terms of self-custody innovation, and it feels great in hand. Now, yes, is it as secure as a cold card? No. Like, is it as private? No. But it's strictly better than ETFs, and anyone who can buy Bitcoin on Charles Schwab can store Bitcoin on a BitKey. And so I think people are sleeping on this. Like, this is now, like, when I give Christmas gifts or stuff, give them a BitKey. They set it up. They don't need a tutorial. They just download the app, register their fingerprint on the device, tap it, save it to iCloud. Perfect. It's not perfect, you know. Is it NSA proof? Definitely not NSA proof. Neither is the ETF. Neither is keeping their Bitcoin on Coinbase. But it takes a very deliberate trade-off balance, and it's very difficult for you to lose your Bitcoin, which is, let's be honest, the way most people lose their Bitcoin is not theft. It's from actually losing it.
This is not brought to you by BitKey.
No, they don't sponsor me.
I think it's a great device. I know some of the guys who helped to build it. I think it's great for under one Bitcoin. 1 Bitcoin or less.
I don't agree with that.
You'd say you'd put like 150 Bitcoin on this thing?
Wait,
like,
yeah. So,
no.
I mean, so there was the tweet
What
that
if
went
somebody
viral.
was rich and 1,000 Bitcoin they want to put on this? You think
It
you would be
depends.
okay with that?
It depends how wealthy you are. You know, like if you're worth $1 billion, having 10 Bitcoin, $1 million on a BitKey is I think is like a great fuck you bag or whatever, like your self-custody bag. I don't. Should people have their entire life savings on a BitKey? Probably not.
Here's my
That tweet went viral. That someone was like, if you have over $1 million, you should buy an ETF instead of having it in self-custody single sig. I would say I would recommend someone to have $1 million in a BitKey than have it in an ETF. Like, that makes sense to me.
So here's what I would say about the BitKey is that there are some trade-offs about it that I don't like, and I think Matt agrees with those points. We don't need to get into it and litigate it all here, but I think if you have over $100,000, I mean, 1 Bitcoin is $100,000, right? Or like
That's
close
pretty
to.
Crazy.
So if you have over $100,000 in a device like this, which is, there's some significant level of trust here between you and the developers of this device, I think that it would be very appropriate in order to slowly educate yourself and, move over in time to a much more trustless security setup, which is also probably a multi-sig enabled security setup. So one thing I like is that the BitKey onboards people to collaborative multi-sig, which I think is just, the best thing for most people in the beginning. There's a big debate between single sig and multi-sig in the Bitcoin community, but like, I think really that just comes down to a lot of people being very comfortable with their custody arrangements over many years. I like to always be moving to the newest and best and greatest and latest Bitcoin custody solution. And, that is some type of geographically distributed multi-sig at this current moment in time. I think in the future, it's going to be some type of geographically distributed multi-sig plus time locks with hierarchical key control, but that's a topic for another time. This thing is great, though, to onboard people to multi-sig, but it's just like, I don't know, once you have over 6 figures, I would start to do some more research. That's just me personally. Yeah. I wouldn't keep more than a Bitcoin in this thing. But Matt, Matt's point about is valid. Yeah.
My point is it's not an amount, right? I agree with you. Like, look, I would never use a BitKey, right? And so there's a lesson there in practice, right? Is why wouldn't I use a BitKey? Is because I would rather use something more secure and more sovereign. And I've been active in the Bitcoin space and I've done the work. So I'm able to do that, right? Now, I think it's a beautiful top of funnel. So it's not an amount, right? Because if you could do 2 top of funnels right now, right? You could do an ETF, or you can keep it with a traditional custodian, or you can start with the BitKey. And then in either situation, you should improve your setup over time. I think people that start with a BitKey are probably more likely to actually improve their setup than someone who starts an ETF and just leaves it there. And we both know that there are many people with over $100,000 in the ETF. That they just like go, they call their broker, they're like, okay, I would put 1.5 million in the ETF. And the trust model there is just strictly worse. So,
yeah. Agreed. I think it's equivalent to like the F-35, a fighter jet versus like the Cirrus Vision jet, which is made for dentists who fly part-time and it has a big parachute and like an onboard computer system, et cetera.
I mean, BitKey, neither me or HODL are paid by BitKey.
No.
But we do have a financial incentive to promote AnchorWatch. I think AnchorWatch could be a massive development in the space of ultra high net worths that don't want to keep it in an ETF. They can self-custody in a smart, very technically sound way, multi-sig, with degrading time locks with AnchorWatch, and then they can get it insured by Lloyd's of London. And they're going to have to pay a premium for that, right? They're going to have to pay a fee for that insurance. But I think that's something that a lot of high net worths will be very comfortable with, and also strictly better than an ETF.
I agree with you on AnchorWatch, and I'm bullish on insured self-custody in general. And I also think that, AnchorWatch is not just insurance, but it's look, Matt's got me doing a commercial here now. But like it's literally like it's mini-script enabled hierarchical key control, which the guys at like Liana Wallet are also doing. So there's, open source cypherpunk versions of this as well. And I think just in general, it's a much more robust form of custody. And the insurance is for people that don't want privacy, but do want enhanced security and want all the benefits and trade-offs that come with self-custody versus the trade-offs that come with owning the ETF. And so, I'm super bullish on those things. I am an investor, full disclosure, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah.
Are you going to be the first customer of AnchorWatch?
I was usurped by another investor. Somebody else usurped me. But, I think with some portion of Bitcoin, not with the entire stack, I think there are different, not to get into all the details of my personal situation, but there are, areas where I want privacy and areas where I don't want privacy based on different like tranches of Bitcoin,
Yeah, the trade-off with AnchorWatch is privacy and the fee. You have to pay an insurance fee.
All right, to close out, HODL, how are you feeling about your bet with Peter by the end of next year?
Super good about it. No, it's by the end of 27. I have until
Which
January.
bet is this?
Oh.
So I bet with Peter, Bitcoin would hit $1 million before January 1st, 2028. So I have until, so I mean, I'm basically taking a bet on the super cycle, more or less.
No, it doesn't even have to be a super cycle to hit that.
Doesn't even have to be. That's true.
Would you take the over or under on that, Matt?
How much is the bet?
1 Bitcoin.
A Bitcoin.
Wow, he's fucking idiot. Why would he take that bet?
I know, it's a good bet for me, right?
I mean, he's only betting the Bitcoin that HODL's already given him.
He's been very confident about all our bets. So, actually, I got paid back a Bitcoin from BlockFi. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. One of the former sponsors of this podcast.
Not from Peter, though.
Yeah, not
but
from Peter.
Yours is open. Your side of the bet is open ended. Like you don't know how much a Bitcoin is worth if you win that bet.
Well, that's the thing. It could be
if you lose, it's less than $1 million.
Yeah, I could be paying Pete $900,000 or whatever, right? And Pete could be paying me $3 million.
Yeah.
We don't know. Yeah.
That's a fun one. I mean, I would take HODL's side of that bet.
Listen, if I lose that bet, I'm going to end up supporting the Bedford Football Club, which I'm okay with. And if I win that bet, I'm going to spend Pete's money on something just so stupid. It's going to be glorious. I'm going to waste it.
Are you going to come back to Bedford this year, HODL?
I think I will, yeah. I think I'll be there.
Good. Matt,
you should come.
I'm not going. Is the conference? You're going to do the conference again?
Yeah, we're doing it in April.
I think I'm done with conferences. I think no more Bitcoin conferences.
Yeah, but this isn't like a normal conference.
That's what everyone says. That's what all the we could put a pin in it, but I'm not committing.
We can put a pin in it, but no. All right, cool. Let's close out. Where do you want to send anyone?
Cashew.me. Go play around with Ecash.
Co-signed.
Primal.net/Odell. If you want to find me on Nostr. And I would just implore people once again, just search Primal in your favorite app store. and just play around with it, get started. I guess disclosure, 1031, my venture fund is an investor in Primal and AnchorWatch and Cold Card. I don't know if we've talked about any other portfolio companies on the stream today, but if you want to learn more about 1031, you can go to 1031.vc.
Cool. Appreciate you guys. Thank you for that.
Beautiful.
Thank you. Great rip.